I needed to get away for a while. Life had started to feel heavy in a way I couldn't explain, like I'd been carrying a weight for too long without realizing how tired it had made me. I wasn't depressed exactly, just drained. I worked a desk job at a small tech firm, doing back-end programming, and spent most days staring at screens, answering emails, going through meetings that blurred together. I hadn't taken time off in over a year, and it was catching up with me. One night, I stayed late to finish some code cleanup, and I realized I hadn't spoken out loud all day. That hit me weird. I shut my laptop and told my boss the next morning I was taking a week off. He was surprised but didn't push back. I found a cabin online that same afternoon. It was a small place up in northern Minnesota, near the edge of some state forest I'd never heard of. The listing was basic, just a one-room wooden cabin with a loft bed, a wood stove, a small kitchen, and a generator out back. No internet, no cell service. That's what sold me on it. I didn't want notifications or emails or calls. I wanted quiet, plain, and simple. The cabin sat on a few acres of private land, surrounded by dense woods, and the owner dropped the key in a lockbox on the front porch. I booked it for 6 nights and left 2 days later. I drove most of the day to get up there, with my car packed with groceries, books, a backpack of clothes, and a cooler with food I didn't want spoiling. The last 2 hours were back roads, and the final stretch was a narrow dirt path that wound through thick trees. My GPS stopped working before I turned onto it, and I had to rely on a printed map I'd pulled from the rental listing. It was late afternoon by the time I reached the cabin. It was smaller than I expected, tucked between trees like it was trying to disappear. The wooden siding was weathered and gray, the porch slanted slightly, and the windows were small and old-fashioned. But it was clean, and it smelled like wood smoke and pine inside. I unpacked quickly, putting perishables in the little propane fridge, setting my bag near the ladder to the loft, and checking out the place in more detail. There was no plumbing. The kitchen sink drained into a gray water tank, and I had to fill jugs from a hand pump well out back. There was a composting toilet in a shed a few yards from the cabin, and a battery-powered lantern inside it. Felt rustic, but not primitive. I didn't mind. The first night was quiet. I lit a fire in the wood stove and read for a few hours while it got dark outside. It was pitch black once the sun dropped. No streetlights, no house lights from a neighbor, nothing but the woods pressing in on all sides. The silence was deep, not just quiet, but empty. It made my ears ring a little, like the absence of sound itself was a kind of pressure. I fell asleep early and slept hard. I woke up around dawn to soft light coming through the window and the sound of birds in the trees. I made coffee on the stovetop, ate a granola bar, and took a short walk around the cabin property. There was a trail that led out back and curved into the woods, but I didn't follow it far, just enough to see that it kept going deeper, marked only by a faint break in the underbrush. The second day passed easily. I read, made soup for lunch, and tried not to think too much. That was the goal. Unplug, unwind, just be. But by that night, something started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious, just little things. The woods felt heavier, not physically, but emotionally, if that makes sense. Like they were watching. I chalked it up to city nerves. I wasn't used to being alone in such a remote place. I tried to shake it off, but I found myself glancing out the windows more often, listening harder. I double-checked the lock on the front door before bed and kept the lantern next to the mattress. At some point during the night, I woke up without knowing why. There was no noise, no dream I could remember. I just woke, fully and suddenly, like something had touched me. I lay still, heart beating a little faster, and stared at the dark wooden ceiling above me in the loft. The fire was out. It was cold. I thought I heard something downstairs, but it was faint, just a creak, probably the wood contracting from the drop in temperature. I pulled the blanket tighter and closed my eyes. The next morning, I found the back door unlatched. It wasn't wide open or anything, just pulled to without the latch catching. I knew I'd locked it. I'd made a point of checking both doors before going to bed. Still, it was an old cabin. Maybe the wood had warped. Maybe the latch didn't hold. I checked it a few times throughout the morning, opening and closing it, testing the lock. Seemed fine, just old. That day, I decided to follow the trail a little farther into the woods. I needed to stretch my legs, and part of me wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't getting spooked. I brought water, a granola bar, and my knife. The trail was narrow but easy to follow. It twisted through trees, dipped down a small ravine, then climbed back up and curved around a cluster of mossy boulders. After maybe 40 minutes, I came to a small clearing where the trail ended. In the center of the clearing was an old, rusted-out trailer. It had been there a long time. The paint was faded, the windows broken, and one side was sagging in. It was maybe 20 feet long, and there were no tracks or signs of activity around it, just leaf litter and pine needles. I walked a slow circle around it, not getting too close. Something about it made me uneasy. It wasn't just old. It was abandoned, like someone had walked away from it mid-thought and never came back. I didn't try to go inside. I didn't even touch it. I just looked, circled once, then turned back the way I came. I walked faster on the way back, and by the time I saw the cabin again through the trees, I realized I was sweating. The air had cooled, but I was flushed, my stomach tense. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up to sounds, cracks, rustles, thumps. Every time I looked out the loft window, there was nothing, just black trees and the faint outline of moonlight. But once, just once, I thought I saw something move. Not big, just a flicker of motion near the tree line, like someone shifting their weight. I stayed up for hours after that, sitting with the lantern on and the knife in my lap. I don't know what I was expecting to do with it. I didn't even know what I was afraid of. Just something wasn't right. By morning, I had decided to leave early. I still had 2 nights left on my booking, but I didn't care. I'd had enough. The place was too quiet, too isolated, and the longer I stayed, the more I felt like I was being watched. I packed quickly, loading up my cooler, stuffing my clothes back into the backpack, and triple-checking that I hadn't left anything behind. I was almost done when I noticed something in the mud behind the cabin. Footprints. Not boot prints. Not mine. These were bare, human, wide and flat with visible toes. They led from the tree line to the back wall of the cabin and stopped beneath the window. There were at least 3 of them, slightly overlapping, pressed deep into the soft earth like someone had stood there a while. My chest tightened. I looked around, slow and careful. Nothing moved. No sound but the wind in the trees. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, then turned and walked around to the front. I got in the car and drove out fast. The dirt road felt narrower going back. I watched the mirrors constantly, half expecting to see someone step into view behind me. But there was no one, just trees rushing past. I didn't stop until I reached the highway. Once I had service again, I called the cabin owner to let them know I'd left early. I didn't mention the footprints. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. I spent that night in a motel an hour south. Couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building made me flinch. I left the light on and kept the curtains shut tight. Back home, I tried to forget about it. I deleted the rental listing from my bookmarks. I told my coworkers the trip was relaxing. But even now, months later, I still think about that place. I think about the trailer in the woods, about the footprints, about the nights I woke up without knowing why. And the part that sticks with me the most, the part that I never told anyone, was something I noticed just before I pulled out of the cabin driveway. There was a mark in the dust on the hood of my car, a handprint. It was faint, just the outline of fingers and part of a palm, smudged into the dirt. But it was there, and it was small, too small to be mine. I hadn't seen a single person since I'd arrived, not one. And that trail out back, I looked it up later. It wasn't supposed to lead to anything. The state forest map didn't even show it. There was no record of a trailer or a campsite or any structure out there at all. So I don't know who or what left those prints. I don't know who stood outside my cabin. I don't know what I might have woken up to if I hadn't decided to leave. But I haven't been back to the woods since, and I don't think I ever will. I rented the cabin because I needed to get away. It wasn't about relaxing, really. I wasn't looking for some scenic escape or peaceful weekend in nature. I just needed quiet. No emails, no work calls, no errands, no neighbors. I'd been working 60-hour weeks for nearly 6 months, barely sleeping, drinking too much caffeine, and just unraveling. I wasn't falling apart in some dramatic way, I just felt like I was running on empty, and I didn't want to wait until I crashed. The cabin I found online was a private rental, not on Airbnb or anything like that. It was posted on an old-school message board where people listed hunting leases and fishing cabins. The owner said it was off-grid, but not far from a state highway. No running water, no electricity, just a wood stove, an outhouse, and a mattress in the loft. Sounded perfect. No cell reception, no distractions. I took a Friday off and left early in the morning, heading north. I had the coordinates saved to a GPS unit I bought just for the trip. The last 30 minutes of the drive were down a gravel logging road with no signs, just mile after mile of trees. I passed 2 empty hunting shacks along the way, both of them sun-faded and sagging. Then I came to a clearing where the trees opened up enough to show a narrow footpath marked by a white cloth tied to a birch branch. I parked just off the road, locked the car, and hiked in. The air was cooler under the trees, and the only sounds were birds and the crunch of my boots on leaves. The trail was barely visible, but I followed the GPS and it led me straight to it. The cabin was smaller than I imagined. Rough-cut logs, a tin roof, and a front porch with 2 chairs and a small table. There was a rusted axe leaning against the steps, and a bundle of firewood stacked under the eaves. The front door creaked when I opened it, but everything inside was dry and clean. It smelled like pine and smoke and dust, old but not rotten. There was 1 window in the main room and 1 in the loft. The wood stove stood in the corner with a steel pipe going up through the roof. The mattress in the loft was bare, but I brought my own sleeping bag and pillow. I unpacked some supplies, checked out the outhouse a short walk behind the cabin, and then sat on the porch with a bottle of water and just breathed for a while. That first day passed quietly. I gathered some more firewood from the trees behind the cabin, split a few logs, and boiled water on the stove for instant noodles. It was good not hearing anything but the wind and birds. I wrote in a journal, stared out the window, and listened to the fire crackle. That night, I slept like a rock. No streetlights, no car noises, just blackness and silence. It was probably the best sleep I'd had all year. The second day, I spent exploring. I followed a game trail deeper into the woods, just seeing where it led. I found a dry creek bed and what looked like an old fire ring from a hunter or camper. I sat there for a while and watched the trees sway. At some point, I started feeling like I was being watched. Not in a spooky way, just a gut thing, like something was nearby. I waited, didn't hear anything, and eventually headed back. Back at the cabin, I made some instant rice with canned chicken and sat on the porch again. The sun was going down behind the trees, and the wind had picked up. A storm was supposed to move in that night, so I double-checked the windows and brought in extra firewood. That night, the rain started around 11. It was steady at first, just tapping on the tin roof. I lay in the loft, watching the shadows from the wood stove flicker on the walls. But around midnight, I heard something that made me sit up. It was a thud, dull and solid, like something hitting wood. I froze. Then another thud. Not sharp like a branch falling, not echoing like thunder, just heavy. I got up slowly and looked out the loft window. It was too dark to see anything. The rain blurred the view, streaking down the glass. I waited, listening. Nothing but rain and wind. I finally lay back down and told myself it was a tree limb hitting the side of the cabin. But I didn't fall asleep again for hours. The next morning, the rain had stopped. Everything outside looked wet and gray. I stepped onto the porch and immediately noticed the axe was gone. The axe that had been leaning against the steps. It wasn't there. I walked around the cabin thinking maybe the wind knocked it over or something, but I couldn't find it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there during the night. I hiked down the trail a little to see if there were footprints, but the ground was soaked and covered in leaf litter. Nothing clear. I started feeling uneasy. I didn't bring a gun, just a small folding knife. I suddenly regretted that. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe I moved the axe and forgot. Maybe I dropped it farther back when I was splitting wood. I walked the whole area behind the cabin again. Didn't see it. Still, I tried to calm myself. I made some oatmeal, tried to read a little, and even napped for a while. That afternoon, I decided to stay close. I didn't hike anywhere, didn't explore. I just kept to the porch and the inside. I kept glancing toward the trees, scanning for movement. I didn't see anything, but something felt wrong. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The birds that had been chattering the day before were gone. Even the wind felt still. Right before dark, I went to use the outhouse. I took a flashlight just in case, since the sky was already going dim. The trail to the outhouse was only about 30 feet, but it felt longer. When I came back out, I spotted something that stopped me cold. On the side of the cabin, carved into the wood just below the window, were 3 parallel scratches. Deep, even deliberate. They hadn't been there before. I would have seen them. I ran my hand over them. They were fresh, still rough to the touch, like they'd been made recently. I went back inside, locked the door, and slid the wood bar across it. I checked the windows, stacked more wood in the stove, and sat down with my flashlight nearby. I stayed up until past midnight, listening. I heard nothing, not even rain or wind, just silence. I finally dozed off in the chair. At some point during the night, I woke up in the loft with a jolt. Something had woken me, but I didn't know what. Then I heard it, a creak. Floorboards. Inside the cabin. My throat closed up. I was still in my sleeping bag, and I didn't move. I just listened. Another creak. Then nothing. I waited, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I didn't move for maybe 10 minutes. Eventually, I crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down. The main room was empty. The fire had gone out, and the coals glowed faintly. I couldn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything else. I stayed frozen up there until morning. When it was light enough, I climbed down. Nothing looked touched. The door was still locked. The windows still shut. But I know what I heard. I know I didn't dream it. Something or someone had been in there, or right outside, maybe even on the porch. I packed everything up right then. I didn't eat, didn't stop to write in the journal. I shoved my sleeping bag into my pack, grabbed my flashlight and GPS, and left. I didn't look back at the cabin. I just followed the trail straight out. But here's the part that still messes with me. When I got back to my car, I found the axe. It was propped up against my driver's side door. Clean, dry, like someone had placed it there. Not dropped it, not thrown it, just leaned it there. The ground around the car was muddy, but there were no clear footprints, just faint impressions. One set, not mine. I drove the hell out of there. Didn't stop until I hit a gas station 2 towns away. I sat in the car with the engine running and just stared at the wheel for a long time. Eventually, I told myself it could have been a prank. Maybe some local who doesn't like people using that land. Maybe just some messed up loner who watches for visitors and likes to scare them off. But that's not what really bothers me. What really bothers me is how careful they were. No broken windows, no damage, just enough to let me know I wasn't alone. Just enough to make me leave. And whoever it was, if it was just one person, they never showed their face. They never made a sound. They were just there, watching, waiting. I never reported it. Never called the guy I rented the place from. I just left the whole thing behind. I haven't camped since. I don't go into the woods anymore. Even a walk in a city park makes me uneasy now, because I know how quiet a person can be, how invisible, how close, and I know I wasn't supposed to stay. I've done a lot of camping in my life, hiked through dense woods, spent nights in all kinds of places, on rocky ridges, along lakes, even inside abandoned ranger towers. But what happened at that cabin in northern Montana stuck with me in a way nothing else ever has. Not because of what I saw, but because of how close I came to not making it out. Not because of anything supernatural or strange, just something real, something that lives and breathes in the woods like everything else. A bear. I had rented the place for a week to be alone. I needed it. I had just gone through a rough patch. Work stress, a breakup, and the feeling that I had been stretched too thin for too long. I wanted silence. wanted to be away from people. The cabin was small and plain, about 20 feet by 20 feet, made of old pine logs that had darkened over time. It was on a little plot of leased land that jutted off the edge of Flathead National Forest. No neighbors, no cell service. Just trees, wind, and quiet. There was a wood stove inside for heat, a small propane burner for cooking, and an outhouse about 20 yards out back. The water came from a rain barrel set up with a basic filtration system. It wasn't fancy. That was the point. I arrived in the afternoon on a Tuesday. The last hour of the drive was all gravel and potholes. I had to go slow, winding up switchbacks until I hit the small clearing where the cabin sat. The forest around it was thick with pines and firs, some so tall they blocked out the sun entirely. The air smelled like wet earth and bark, and the breeze carried the faint sound of distant crows. The first 2 days were quiet. I split wood, cooked simple meals, and read by the window. I went on short hikes, never straying too far, just enough to stretch my legs. I'd sit out on the front steps each evening as the light faded, listening to the forest settle. Squirrels rustled the underbrush. Occasionally, I'd spot deer between the trees. It was peaceful in a way that modern life rarely allows anymore. No alerts, no calls, no people asking anything from me. On the third morning, I noticed the first sign. Something had been near the cabin during the night. The trash can outside, one of those heavy-duty metal ones, had been knocked over. The lid was a few feet away, half buried in leaves. The bag inside was torn apart, shredded. Bits of plastic, food wrappers, and old banana peels were scattered all around. I thought maybe raccoons or even a coyote. I cleaned it up, secured the can with a bungee cord, and didn't think much more of it. That night, I stayed up late, reading by lantern light. Around midnight, I heard a thump, not loud, but heavy, solid, like weight being dropped onto the ground. I paused, turned down the lantern, and listened. The woods were quiet. No wind, no insects, just stillness. Then another sound, something brushing against the corner of the cabin. A slow, dragging sound, maybe a footstep, or something rubbing its body against the wall. My heart started beating faster. I stood slowly and went to the window, careful not to make any noise. The moon was out, casting a dull, pale light over the clearing. The trees were black shadows. I could see the outline of the trash can again, tipped over. Then I saw it. It was huge, a bear, easily over 7 feet tall if it stood upright, but now it was on all fours, moving slowly around the edge of the cabin. Its fur was dark, maybe brown or even black in the poor light. It was sniffing the ground, swinging its head side to side. I froze. Every instinct told me not to move. I knew bears wandered through the area, but this one was close. Too close. I had food inside, dry goods, cans, bread, jerky. I hadn't stored it in a bear-safe container. The cabin wasn't airtight. If it really wanted to come inside, it could. For almost an hour, I stood at that window. The bear moved around the cabin, sniffing and pawing at the porch. It knocked over a chair, scratched at the corner where I had chopped wood earlier that day. Then, finally, it wandered back into the trees. Slowly, lazily, like it wasn't in a rush. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went outside with my axe. The bear had left deep claw marks in the dirt and mud near the porch. Its tracks were all around the cabin. I could see where it had stood up on its hind legs and leaned against the wall. The scratch marks on the wood went almost to the window. I didn't feel safe anymore. I gathered what food I had left and stored it inside a large cooler, wrapping it tight in garbage bags and duct taping it shut. Then I stashed it inside a locked closet, away from the outer walls. It was the best I could do without a proper bear box. The next 2 days were tense. Every sound in the woods made me jump. I didn't hike. I barely stepped off the porch. Just stayed near the door, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the treeline. It didn't come back during the day. But at night, I started hearing it again. The same soft thumps. The same slow movement around the cabin. The 5th night was the worst. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of wood cracking. Not twigs. Something heavy, like pressure being applied to the edge of the wall. I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't even reach for the lantern. I just waited, staring at the outline of the room in the dark. Then came a loud thud, right against the door. The bear was trying to get in. I grabbed my rifle and crept toward the door, every step slow and quiet. I could hear it breathing on the other side, heavy and steady. The door was thick, reinforced with cross beams, but the bear shoved against it again. The entire frame shook. I backed away. Another shove, this one harder. The hinges groaned. I aimed the rifle toward the door but didn't fire. I didn't want to shoot unless I had no choice. Wounding a bear could make things worse, make it panic. I waited, listening to it scratch at the lower part of the door, then the base of the wall. It circled the cabin again, brushing past the windows. I heard the trash can go over again. Then, nothing. It left before sunrise. That morning, I made a decision. I packed my gear every last bit, stuffed my bag, grabbed my rifle, and made my way down the trail toward where I had parked my truck at the bottom of the ridge. It was about a 2-hour hike, and I moved fast. No brakes. Every noise made me snap my head around. Every broken branch or gust of wind made me grip the rifle tighter. I didn't see the bear on the way out, but I felt like I was being watched the whole time. Back at the truck, I threw my pack in the bed and didn't look back. I didn't even stay the last night I had paid for. I drove straight back to town, still watching the rearview mirror. That experience changed how I feel about being alone in the woods. It reminded me that no matter how peaceful it feels, nature doesn't care about you. The woods aren't yours. They never were. You're a visitor there, an outsider, and sometimes something out there notices. When I told a local game warden what had happened, he nodded and said I was lucky. There had been reports of a large male bear in the area that had been getting more aggressive, likely due to poor food supply that year. He told me I was right to leave. I haven't been back to that cabin. It's probably still there, weathered and quiet, still surrounded by trees, but I don't think I'll return. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still hear it. The sound of claws on old wood, the slow breathing, the heavy weight pressing against the door. It wasn't evil. It wasn't a monster. It was just a bear. But when something that big decides to test your walls in the dark, you understand very quickly just how small you are, and how thin the line is between safety and danger out there. I was never the type to go off into the woods alone. I wasn't raised that way, but after everything that had gone on that year, my brother's accident, the job loss, my girlfriend walking out, I just needed space. I needed to be nowhere for a while, somewhere quiet, somewhere without a signal or the hum of people. So when I found that cabin listing, I jumped on it without thinking twice. It was a week-long rental up north, somewhere in the edges of Michigan. It sat back off a dirt road with no neighbors in sight, just trees, hills, and silence. I paid in cash, and the owner emailed me basic directions and a reminder that there was no cell service up there. That was the whole point. The drive took most of the day. Once I hit the smaller towns, the roads got worse. More gravel, more narrow turns. Eventually, it was just me and the forest. When I reached the cabin, the sun was starting to dip and everything had that gold tint. The cabin itself looked older than the photos. Logs darkened by weather, roof sagging a little, windows dusty. But it had a small porch, a propane tank out back, and a little wood stove inside. It wasn't much, but I didn't need much. There was no water, just a hand pump a little ways off into the trees, and no power aside from a couple battery lanterns and a solar pack for small devices. I didn't bring anything except a cooler, some canned food, a small gas burner, and clothes. I had no intention of doing anything but sleeping, reading, walking around, and maybe thinking through things in my head. That first night was uneventful. I ate some cold beans out of a can and fell asleep in the lumpy old cot with a scratchy blanket over me. I could hear raccoons or something scratching around outside once or twice, but I was too tired to care. It was just background noise. The second day, I went on a short hike. The woods were thick, but there were a few old logging trails. I didn't wander far, just far enough to clear my head. I didn't see any houses, no signs of other people, not even tire tracks. It was just me and the trees and the wind. That night, though, something woke me up. It wasn't an animal sound. It was a hard thud against the side of the cabin, near where my head was. I froze and just laid there listening. Nothing after that. No footsteps, no other sounds. I figured maybe it was a branch falling or some wildlife running into it. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I went outside and walked around the cabin. I expected to find a branch or a rock or something. Instead, I found a dent in the siding, a small one right at head height. It didn't look fresh, but I couldn't be sure. I didn't remember seeing it before. I ran my finger along it, checked the ground. No branch, no rocks, nothing nearby that could have hit it. Still, I told myself it was nothing. I went about my day like normal, read a bit, boiled water to clean up, made a small fire in the pit out front. That night, I had a harder time falling asleep. I left one of the lanterns on low. Around midnight, I heard something again. This time it was lighter, like a soft tapping sound. I sat up and strained my ears. It was definitely from outside. A sort of tick, 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 right against one of the window panes. It went on for maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I didn't move. I just sat there in the cot, holding my breath. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I laid back down and tried to ignore the gnawing tension in my chest. By the fourth day, I was starting to feel off, like something was watching me. I turn around while walking and swear I saw movement through the trees, shadows flicking just out of sight. I started carrying the hatchet with me, not because I thought I'd need it, but just for peace of mind. I'd walk 10 minutes from the cabin, look around, and head straight back. The silence was no longer calming. It felt heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. That night, I decided to stay up. I kept the fire going late, sat on the porch with my flashlight and just listened. The forest makes noises. Sure, twigs snapping, owls whined through the branches. But this was different. At around 2 in the morning, I heard something heavy crunching through the undergrowth, not far off. Too heavy for a deer. It wasn't stomping around, but it wasn't trying to be quiet either. I shut off the lantern and crouched low, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps got closer, then stopped. I held my breath for a long time, flashlight off, ears straining. I heard a faint, slow exhale, like someone standing just out of sight, trying not to breathe too loud. My chest tightened. I stayed crouched for what felt like an hour. Then nothing, just silence again. In the morning, I found boot prints in the dirt near the edge of the clearing. Not mine. They were wider, deeper. I followed them for a few feet, but they veered into the woods and vanished into the thick brush. My stomach dropped. Someone had been out there, watching, close. I thought about packing up right then and leaving, but I reminded myself it was just one more night. I could lock up, sleep with the hatchet next to me, and leave first thing in the morning. That last night is burned into my brain. I set up the cot against the door and turned off every light. I kept the hatchet in my hand under the blanket and left my boots on. I didn't sleep. I just laid there, eyes on the window, ears twitching with every sound. Stayed quiet for a long time. Then around 3 a.m., I heard the back door creak. Not loud, just a soft, drawn-out squeak. My blood turned cold. There's only one door to that cabin, and I was laying against it. That creak came from inside. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited, listening so hard my ears started to hurt. Then the floorboard creaked. Inside, near the stove. I sat up as slowly as I could, heart pounding in my throat. The cot groaned under me. Another creak. Closer. I gripped the hatchet tight and stood, eyes trying to adjust to the darkness. There was no lantern, no flashlight, just shadows. I stepped toward the corner slowly, every step like walking on glass. As I rounded the edge, I could barely make out a figure standing near the wood stove. A shape tall and still, like it had been standing there for hours. I froze. The air in my throat wouldn't move. I didn't say a word. I just backed away, step by step, until I reached the door. I moved the cot as quiet as I could, lifted the latch and stepped outside into the night. Cold air hit my face. I ran barefoot through the dirt and leaves, heart hammering, not stopping until I reached the edge of the road. I stayed there, crouched behind a tree, until the sun came up. When it was light enough, I walked back slowly. The door was open. The inside of the cabin looked the same, except one thing. A pair of muddy boot prints stood in the middle of the floor, pointing toward the cot. I grabbed my cooler, my bag, and didn't look back. I left the rest. I didn't report it. I didn't know what I'd say. That someone was watching me? That they came into the cabin in the middle of the night and stood there doing nothing? I don't know what they wanted. I don't know how long they were out there watching me. I just know they were. Back home, it took a while before I could sleep without checking every window and door twice. I got motion lights installed and cameras. I haven't been camping since. I haven't even left the city for more than a few hours. Something about knowing how far out someone was willing to go, just to be there in the dark, watching, stays with you. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't stayed up that last night. If I'd been asleep when they came in. If I hadn't noticed. The scariest part isn't what happened. It's what didn't. It's knowing that someone stood there, in that room with me, and made a choice. And I'll never know why. I remember the exact moment it hit me that something was wrong. It was cold, maybe just below freezing, and the fire inside the cabin had burned low. I was lying on a squeaky cot under 2 sleeping bags layered together. My brother, Caleb, was on the other cot, already snoring. We were tucked away deep in the woods of Pennsylvania, about an hour's drive past anything resembling a town. It was mid-October. We'd planned this hunting trip months in advance. The cabin itself wasn't much, just 4 walls, a roof, and a metal stove for heat. No running water, no electricity. It sat on about 50 acres of wooded land, thick with pine and birch, with an old logging trail that led in from the road. The owner had warned us it was rugged, but that's what we wanted. Off the grid, no phones, just nature. Our days were the same: wake up at dawn, make some instant coffee over the stove, head out with our rifles. We never wandered far apart, and we always returned before dark. The hunting hadn't been great. Saw a few deer, but nothing worth taking. Still, it was peaceful out there, quiet, until the 3rd night. We'd gone to bed around 10. Wind was light, no rain, the kind of cold that feels sharper inside your nose when you breathe. I was drifting off when I thought I heard something. Faint, distant, like a woman's voice. At first, I figured it was my mind playing tricks. You hear things out there. Trees creak, animals bark or cry out. Sound carries strangely in the woods. But it happened again. A scream. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded human. Far off, but sharp enough to cut through the stillness. I sat up in bed and listened, every muscle in my body stiff. Another scream, higher this time. Not constant, more like short bursts, like someone yelling for help. Caleb didn't stir, so I got up, pulled on my boots, and stepped outside quietly. My breath fogged in the air. The forest was dark. Darker than I remembered it being the nights before. Maybe clouds had rolled in. I stood on the little porch, scanning the treeline. The moon was barely visible through a thin layer of clouds, casting the forest in dim silver. Another scream. This one was louder, definitely human. It was coming from somewhere behind the cabin, south, deeper into the woods. My first instinct was to grab a flashlight and start moving toward it, but I hesitated. I didn't know what I'd be walking into. What if someone was hurt? What if it was a trap? There were stories, people using cries for help to lure someone in. I stayed out there for 10 minutes. Then the screaming stopped. Just stopped, like a switch had been flipped. I waited, listening hard, but there was nothing. Just the wind through the trees and the occasional pop from the stove inside. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. My ears kept tricking me into thinking I heard something moving outside. I stayed on my cot, heart racing at every sound. In the morning, I told Caleb I thought I heard something weird, like a scream. I didn't go into details, just said it might have been an animal or a weird echo. We were both cautious about it. We took our rifles with us, and I found myself scanning the woods constantly, never letting my guard down. That day, we saw no wildlife at all, not even squirrels. Everything was too quiet. The birds were gone. No rustling in the brush. I started to get that crawling feeling on the back of my neck, the sense that we weren't alone. Late that afternoon, as we headed back, I noticed something along the trail about a quarter mile from the cabin. There were prints in the mud, barefoot, human, small, like a woman or a teenager. They weren't ours, we always wore boots. The prints weren't deep, so they were fresh, probably within a few hours. That changed everything. Whoever I'd heard screaming had been close, and still might be, but there were no dragging marks, no signs of struggle. Just a trail of small prints heading in and out of the brush. We followed them a bit, but lost them in the undergrowth. The trail led toward a slope with denser trees, and visibility dropped quickly. We didn't push far. It was already getting dark, and we weren't about to get turned around in unfamiliar woods. Back at the cabin, we locked the door and stacked a couple of chairs under the handle for good measure. We kept the rifles close. That night was colder. We used more wood than usual. At one point, I stepped outside to piss, and I swear I saw movement in the trees to the south, just a flicker. Something low, slipping between shadows. The fourth night was the worst. We were eating chili heated over the stove, sitting in silence. Caleb had become jumpy, checking the windows constantly. I felt it too, that sense of being watched. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. The woods had gone wrong. Around midnight, we both shot awake. There was a scream closer this time, not a yell for fun, a real raw scream, someone in pain or terrified. My hands were shaking. We grabbed our rifles but didn't go out. The screams came again, closer. We killed the lantern, sat in the dark. I could hear Caleb breathing heavy. The screams lasted about 10 minutes, off and on, moving through the trees. Then silence, just total dead silence. We sat there in pitch black for over an hour, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. We didn't sleep. In the morning, we decided to leave. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew we weren't going to make it through another night like that. We packed fast, just essentials, loaded our bags and hiked out toward the truck. On the way back, about half a mile from the cabin, we passed something in the brush, off the trail, tucked under a pine tree. It was a red scarf, torn and dirty. Nearby, we found a plastic water bottle, half full, and what looked like a small backpack, torn open. The contents were scattered. Some granola bars, a cracked phone, and a sock. No ID, no name. We took photos on my camera and left everything where it was. The drive back to town was silent. We went straight to the sheriff's station, told them everything. They took it seriously, asked questions, sent a deputy out with us the next day to mark the spot where we found the items. A week later, I got a call. The sheriff told me they'd found the body of a missing hiker about 2 miles south of the cabin. A young woman from out of state, reported missing by her boyfriend a few days before we arrived. She'd been abducted while hiking alone. They believe she escaped and tried to find help, but got turned around in the woods. From the condition of her body, they said she died from exposure and possible injuries from a fall. They found evidence she'd been held somewhere, possibly a pit or an old shed. There were signs of restraint. They were investigating the area for signs of anyone else who might have been involved. No one was arrested. They said the tracks and evidence pointed to more than one person being out there, possibly 2 men. I haven't been back to those woods since. I sold my gear. Caleb and I haven't spoken about it much. We both still think about the screams at night, the fact that she was alive out there, that we heard her, and we didn't do anything. It sits with me like a stone, heavy, cold. I replay it sometimes. Standing on that porch, hearing her voice cut through the trees, the forest felt dead those last 2 nights, like everything was hiding, like even the animals knew someone was out there. And the worst part, whoever did it, they're still out there, still walking those woods, waiting. I never used to think much about real danger, the kind that just waits, patient and quiet, out in the open where you don't expect it. I'd done plenty of solo trips, hikes, camps, even some backpacking in places most people never set foot in. But this trip, the one to the cabin up in Idaho, changed how I see everything. And it wasn't because of anything paranormal. It was something worse, real people in the wrong place doing the wrong thing. I found the cabin through a listing on an old travel forum. It wasn't even an official rental, just a guy offering use of his hunting cabin for cheap if you agreed to bring your own supplies and clean up after yourself. No running water, no cell service, no power. Just a roof, 4 walls, and a wood stove. Sounded perfect. I wanted out of town, away from people. Life had been loud and cluttered lately. I craved silence. The drive took about 10 hours from where I lived, with the last 2 on dirt roads that twisted through the hills. I had to stop more than once to clear branches or slow for washouts. My truck barely made it over some of the steeper patches. By the time I pulled into the clearing where the cabin stood, the sun was already low. The trees crowded close, tall pines and spruces that blocked out most of the sky. The cabin sat in a dip just off a barely visible trail, nothing more than a box of old wood with a rusted metal chimney. There was a small porch out front, sagging a little to one side. One window in the front, boarded from the inside. A heavy door with a latch and a padlock. The guy had sent me the combination over email. I opened it and stepped inside. It was dusty and smelled like old smoke, but it was solid. A cot with a mattress, a table and chair, a shelf with some empty jars and old books. The wood stove stood in the corner, and a few pieces of chopped wood were stacked by the door. I checked the walls for holes or animal nests, made sure the windows were sealed, and then started unpacking. I brought everything: cans, dried food, a camping stove, water jugs, blankets, my rifle, and a solar-powered lantern. That first night was peaceful. I made a small fire in the stove, heated some soup, and sat on the steps outside as darkness fell. The forest felt alive in a distant way. Crickets chirping, wind through branches, the occasional crack of something settling in the woods. But it was calm. It felt like the quiet I'd needed. The next 2 days followed a rhythm. I hiked short trails near the cabin, took notes in a journal, chopped more firewood, and cleaned up the place a bit. I found an old trail about a 1/4 mile west of the cabin that led to a small overlook, and I spent most of the second day there, just watching the valley. No people, no planes, no sounds of civilization, just space and quiet. It was on the 3rd morning that I noticed something was off. I woke up early, around 6, and stepped outside to piss. It was cold, and the sky was still gray. As I moved around the side of the cabin, I saw a footprint in the soft dirt near the base of the steps. It wasn't mine, too big and pointed the wrong way. It was fresh. The edges were still sharp. It had rained lightly the night before, so anything from earlier would have been washed out. This one was clean. I stared at it for a while, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't heard anything. No engine, no voices, no footsteps. But someone had walked right up to the cabin during the night. Alone by the look of it. No other prints. No tire tracks nearby. I checked the back of the cabin, no more prints. Nothing disturbed. I spent the rest of that day jumpy. I kept my rifle close, even when chopping wood or walking to the outhouse. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I froze. I kept thinking someone might still be out there, watching, but nothing else happened that day. I convinced myself it had just been a hunter passing through. Maybe he saw the cabin, walked up, and then left. No harm done. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lantern low and sat by the window watching the trees. Every now and then, I'd hear a crack or rustle, but never anything definite. Just forest sounds. But my body stayed tense, like it knew something I didn't. Around 2 a.m., I heard something that froze me solid. A soft scraping like metal on wood, near the front of the cabin. I held my breath and listened. Then, the distinct creak of one of the porch boards, just one shifting under weight. Someone was out there, right outside. I didn't move. I didn't turn on the lantern. I just waited in the dark, clutching the rifle across my chest. After a minute, it stopped. The scraping, the creaking gone. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I stayed frozen in that spot until sunrise. When I finally stepped outside, my heart was pounding. I checked the porch and found deep scratches on the door, right near the latch. Someone had tried to pry it open. They'd used something sharp, maybe a knife or flathead screwdriver. The wood was gouged in small lines, like someone had been careful, quiet, methodical. There were no fresh footprints this time. Whoever it was had been cautious, maybe covered their tracks, maybe walked in over the rocks or dry ground. Couldn't be sure. I thought about packing up that morning and leaving, but something stubborn in me didn't want to. I'd come all this way to find peace, and I didn't want to let fear send me running. So I reinforced the door with a crossbar, just a thick branch wedged into notches I cut into the frame. I moved the table in front of it for good measure. Then I carried my rifle with me even when stepping outside. I didn't go far, just enough to collect firewood or use the outhouse. The rest of the day I stayed inside. That night was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no rustling, nothing. I sat with the lantern off again, staring at the door. I didn't sleep. Sometime near 3 a.m., I heard a sound that still makes me sick to remember. A slow, deliberate knock on the wall. Not the door, the side of the cabin. Just 2 knocks. Then silence. No footsteps, no voice. Just those knocks, like someone reminding me they were still out there. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. I sat there with the rifle pointed at the window, waiting for something, anything, but nothing else happened. Whoever it was didn't try the door, didn't speak. They just knocked and vanished into the trees. At first light, I made my decision. I packed everything as fast as I could, stuffed it all into my bag, grabbed my rifle, and locked the cabin behind me. I didn't bother trying to clean up or leave a note. I just left. The hike back to the truck was the longest of my life. Every 20 yards, I stopped to listen. Every bend in the trail felt like it might hide someone. I moved fast, breathing hard, sweating even in the cold morning air. I kept the rifle ready, never lowered it. When I finally saw the clearing where my truck was parked, I felt the first real relief in days. But that relief vanished the second I got closer. Someone had been there. The tailgate was down. The driver's side door was cracked open, and there were footprints in the mud, dozens of them. Multiple people. They had gone through my truck bed, opened my cooler, looked through my gear. Nothing was stolen, not that I could tell, but it had been searched. I scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, no sound. I threw my gear in, slammed the doors, and started the engine. I didn't stop until I hit the main road 2 hours later. Didn't even slow down for bumps or dips. When I reached a town with service, I pulled over and sat in the truck for a long time, just breathing. I never reported it. What would I have said? Some people messed with my cabin? Searched my truck? They didn't take anything. They didn't hurt me, but they knew where I was. Watched me for days. Knocked on my wall in the middle of the night just to let me know. That was enough. Since then, I don't do solo trips anymore. Not way out like that. I stay where there are other people, other campers, other hikers. And I never, ever go back to places I can't get out of fast. It wasn't ghosts, wasn't demons or spirits or anything like that. It was people, real people, who knew I was alone, who walked right up to my door in the middle of the night, who waited, who watched, who could have done whatever they wanted and didn't. Not yet. That's the part that still gets me. They chose not to, this time.